done a lot of things, Anthony. I think that if I read all of this, this will be the entire length of the podcast. So maybe I'll just have you tell me a little bit about yourself and your journey with climate change.
Okay, my background is teaching. My first degree was in chemistry and biology. So when I went to do my postgraduate, which was in environmental sciences, that's when I picked up interest in climate change, because at about that time, that's when there was a lot of conversation. It hadn't gathered, or it hadn't got the traction it has right now. But the scientists had begun, putting the red flag out there that we are having changes in our atmospheric temperatures, and that they were going to influence climate. And since I was working in wetlands, it kind of captured my interest. So I took it up from there, and I found myself, doing consultancy work, working with different agencies, and yes, so it's something I like. I'm passionate about it. So,
am I allowed to ask when the scientists were starting to put out the red flag?
This was in the early 90s.
Okay.
The early 90s. So we've had quite some time. It was in the Rio conference, where it was a global conference where they actually said that man's activities have started increasing the emissions of the greenhouse gases. Now, the greenhouse gases are the ones that are responsible for warming our atmosphere. They were important for us to even be able to live on Earth, because without them, the temperature conditions would not allow life as we see it. However, when their concentration increases, then it warms up the climate to levels that we begin having these extreme events, things like floods, things like droughts, things like water scarcity, diseases, incidence of diseases. All these are driven by temperature. So what these greenhouse gases do, they're a blanket around the globe. So they capture the heat. Once the heat comes in from the sun, it bounces off the surface of the earth. Now, the light has got different wavelengths. Now, the short wavelength, the light with the short wavelength is dangerous. You remember when they were talking about the ozone layer?
Yes.
And how it was going? Yeah, now, ozone keeps out that short wavelength, because then you get incidences of cancer, skin cancer, and the rest. Now, but the sun has also got the light with the long wavelength, and that's the one that is warm. That's the one that is responsible for the heat, and it's called the infrared. So once that comes in, it bounces off, and it's supposed to get out of the atmosphere. But when you have a high concentration of these gases, what these gases do, they now trap that heat, and then the climate starts to change. Now, the temperature is so important because it's what will trigger all kinds of extreme events. So that's why we're saying that if we go beyond 1.5 degree, it looks very small, just 1.5 degrees from the pre-industrial age, then we are heading for disaster, because then the climate may become too extreme for human life. Maybe other life forms may be able to survive, but for human life, it will become more and more difficult. And as you know, or as you've been hearing now, you've got heat waves. Those are things that when some of us were beginning to read about climate change, we thought that our policymakers and politicians would listen more to the scientists so that we don't get to where we are. But it seems we can only learn through experience.
Why do you think they're not listening? It seems like common sense, right? We have seen this stuff. We've gone through the heat waves. We have periods where the public is speaking out. You see all these comments on Twitter and people saying, oh my God, this heat wave, climate change. But we go back to business as usual within no time. Why do you think we're not learning lessons?
I think it's all about the energy poverty. You know the energy poverty?
Tell me about it.
We always have a deficit of energy. We need energy. And unfortunately, we get most of our energy from the fossil fuels. And that is what is driving the change. So when you look at how dependent we have become on the fossil fuels, and yet they are the ones that are responsible for the emissions, So you have the coal, which you use to provide electricity. You have petroleum, which we all depend on. So the renewable energies are, one, we haven't taken enough time to do the research. The technology development is not in tandem with the needs in terms of energy. We have cut down our forests significantly just because we need energy. So there's a big linkage between climate change and energy. So we've got to think about transition from fossil fuels into the renewable energies in order for us to slow down the rate at which the temperature is changing.
Every time we have conversations around climate change, the first thing people say is that's a very complex subject, and they shy away from the conversation. Why is it complex, and how do we start to break down these conversations?
I think that's just a mindset, because you don't need to know the science. There's a lot of science involved. You need to understand the meteorology and how the ocean behaves, and how it influences your rainfall patterns. Yeah, that can be a bit complicated. However, it is just simple. Just know that as long as you are putting the greenhouse gases out there, they are capturing the heat. And once they capture the heat, it's going to affect the climate. So I don't find it a very complicated.
You're a teacher. That's why you don't find it complicated.
Yeah, because they are just basics. You've just got to know that, we have that, we know how rain is made, okay? Conventional rain. Everybody knows it. At least that is right down from primary. You know that the lake, blows the air, the water vapor goes, it cools, it comes back as rain. Okay? So now that is one of the cycles that is important. And that one will once again be affected by the temperature. See, temperature is a very serious driver, and it's what we should be looking at. Not even the rainfall patterns, but we should be looking at the temperature, because the temperature is the one that determines on how even how you have the formation of the rain from the air currents from the ocean, and how they interlink with the land mass in order for you to have the rain. And of course now you know how important rain is.
Yeah.
But you need also the forests. You need the forests, and I told you that because people don't have energy, they need the forests for energy, for building. The rural communities we talk about. Timber is such an important resource for them. So unless they get an alternative, you can't stop deforestation. And for a long time, I think these gases were not affecting us because the forests were acting as the sinks. You see, there are two sinks for these gases. One is the ocean, and one are the forests. So now those two sinks are now getting to their capacity. And the problem is that once these greenhouse gases go into the ocean, there's a way they change the currents. And therefore they will affect the movement of these currents, and they will affect the rainfall patterns. But at the same time, our rural populations are also cutting down the forests. One, because of the population. Yesterday, the president was happy that over the 30 or so years he has been around, the population has come from, I think, 16 million to about 45. Now, this is not good, because you need to feed that population. And definitely you're going to encroach on some of these other natural resources, which are important in stabilizing the climate. You'll find yourself encroaching on wetlands, you'll find yourself encroaching on forests, you'll find your water bodies being affected, simply because you need to produce enough food for these people to...
For your 45 point something million
yes.
Population.
So when you go to a global level, you find that now we are talking about billions. Okay, so where is all that food going to come from? Because we only produce food through agriculture.
How long have you been with the Food and Agriculture Organization?
I've been there now, it's my 4th year.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've worked in agriculture even before that?
Yes.
From your experience looking at the Uganda agriculture sector and rural development more generally, can you share some examples of the kind of activities that you've been involved in?
Yeah, now to understand the impact of climate change on Uganda, you have got to first of all contextualize. Now, at the global level, we usually have what we call the Conference of Parties. This is when policymakers come together and try to, come up with an agenda on how to address climate change. And you've got, these are negotiations. You've got developing countries who are saying we have a right to develop. So, you can't tell us to stop exploiting our oil. You can't tell us to stop cutting down our forests for timber, because we've got to develop. You are the ones who are responsible, because of your industrial revolution, of pumping all these gases into the atmosphere.
And now we're paying the price.
Yeah. So they say polluter pays. So they're saying look for resources and give our developing nations resources so that we can leave the natural resource base intact. Otherwise, people will go for it. So you have negotiating groups. You have the Africa group. You have the Annex 1 nations. Those are the developed countries. And then you have the Annex 2. The Annex 2, we are normally G77 and China. Then you have the LDC. You have the African, the African group of negotiators. So that's where they try and sit and come to a compromise. How are we going to, handle this threat? So when you, one of the instruments that they came up with is the NDCs, what they call the nationally determined contributions.
Nationally determined contributions.
Contributions, yes. Now, those are the emissions that each country contributes. So each country was supposed to come up with a strategy on how they are going to reduce on these emissions. What contribution? I think Uganda is going to said they'll contribute about 21 or so %. But you see, our emissions are so low that really our problem is not is not emissions, but adaptation. Okay? How are we going to adapt? Adapt means what strategies are we coming up to cope when these impacts of the extreme events come? Our communities, how well are they prepared for these impacts? And then, of course, you look at issues of risk, because different areas have got different levels of risk. You look at issues of vulnerability. Different areas have got different levels. And these are things you have got to look at. So Uganda itself has tried to do a lot in terms of, coming up with the hotspots. But I think, once again, it comes down to resources. They know the hotspots. They know that we are going to have landslides in the mountainous areas. They know when the rains come, the landslides are going to happen, but where are the resources to protect the affected people?
What does our strategy look like? Our strategy for adaptation?
Well, we have one for agriculture that has been well developed. It's called the National Adaptation Plan for Agriculture. One thing is that agriculture as a sector, I think, and energy, they are the ones that are quite sensitive to climate change, and therefore we have to thank the development partners, because they've come and really, put as much resources as they can, because they know that those two sectors, if they are heavily impacted, then the impacts of climate change are going to be very far-reaching. But fortunately enough, Uganda is also endowed. I think we get most of our power is renewable. We have hydropower, and me and you know that over the years we have developed our capacity. Then in agriculture, they've also come up with a national adaptation plan specifically for agriculture. That is at the policy level. And then you see, when you have those kind of instruments, and they've even gone ahead, and we have also a Climate Change Act. I think that was just endorsed by the president, I think, in 2022. And then we also have the National Climate Change Policy. So the framework is there, the enabling environment is there. But one, we have also got a problem of awareness. Most of the times when we go out there, we find that people are supposed to be implementing at a lower level. The local governments, the sub-counties, they don't know anything about these documents. You see? So that's another area where we need to really step up. How do we get these people to understand and use these documents in their planning? So at local level, we try to influence the district development plans. We try to mainstream adaptation activities, because adaptation is not complicated. All you've got to do is look at technologies that will make the population more resilient. When we say resilient, we mean how long will it take you after you have been hit by this impact of climate change? You see, the longer it takes you, it means the more vulnerable you are. The shorter it takes you to come back to where you are, then you are more resilient. So now we have got to also begin thinking about how do we build resilience. Okay, so that's when we've got to begin looking at things like infrastructure. You've got to have good infrastructure for flood control. You've got to build the dams, because you know where the floods are, to keep this water. You've got to do water harvesting on all the buildings, so that when you have these long periods without water, you are not completely, we've got to move away from rain-fed agriculture to irrigation. We've got to look at the livestock. We've got to begin becoming intentional in the kind of fodder that we are giving the animals, because the fodder is there. It has been tested, and you know, they can bale it into hay and feed these cows during the dry season. We've done it in the cattle corridor, and we are seeing the results. Farmers have stopped losing animals, you know. But now the challenge they have is water, because that place is water stressed.
Yeah, and irrigation is a bit tricky for a water stressed area.
Yeah, but Uganda again is fortunate that it has got so many water bodies, so you can just pump that water. You know, you can just pump that water, and in most cases it's not such a long distance. So if we can have a pipeline an oil pipeline from the Albertine region down to some port in Tanzania, why can't we also begin thinking about, you know, building just irrigation pipelines, and even just valley dams, you know, these valley dams, because at one point there's enough water, but we don't trap it. We don't trap it.
So those are some of the opportunities,
yes,
that are coming with climate change,
yeah,
that we are not trapping, as you say.
Yes.
What other areas are you seeing farmers affected by climate change from your work around the country?
Okay, now the farmers also need to adapt to these technologies. You know, they've got to adapt. When we talk about technologies, we say even breeds are technologies. Even crop varieties are technologies. Okay? And most importantly, they've got to start using climate information.
Is it readily available, accessible?
It is, but unfortunately the accuracy. We are not yet at a point where, you know, it's about 90% plus. Actually, if it's about 95% plus, but these things need intentional investment, because, for example, you need the ground instruments to pick this data. The satellites are there, but they give you very coarse information. You've got to make sure that you can give information that is maybe per square mile. And these people do it in Europe. They do it in North America. You know, they'll tell you bad weather is going to be from midday to 3 p.m.
And it's accurate.
And it's exactly that, because they have put the ground instrumentation that helps to correlate with the satellite data, so that you get accurate climate information. Now it is becoming a prerequisite, because the farmers cannot do business as usual. Okay? They have to use this information, first of all, for early warning, because when you give them early warning, they say that every dollar spent on early warning saves $6 for you that you pay after the
disaster.
We are not saying these disasters will go away, but we are saying how prepared are these farmers when this comes, you know? So we can, if we can predict and say, you know, the rains are going to be short, then they have to adjust. They have got to be flexible. Then they'll have to plant the early maturing plants and all that, because that's their livelihood. Yeah?
We're seeing them now migrating to diversifying, you know, to trees and other things.
Yeah.
Because we're being told it's going to rain, it's not going to rain, and we're planting and we're making more losses than.
Yeah, actually diversification is one of the strategies. You should have many enterprises, so that when one is hit, you can survive on the other. Some of them are not as climate sensitive. For example, poultry. Yeah, poultry is not so, because you know the way you look after chicken. you know. It's no longer the wild ones, what they call the free range. You can now put them in one place, build, and you can be sure whether it's, you know, whether it rains or not, you provide the water, you provide the food. But if you have planted maize, you have very little control. Once the weather, a storm comes, you know, it can clear the whole field. It can just flood overnight. So diversification is also one of the things that we are trying to encourage farmers to do. Don't have only one enterprise. Otherwise you become more vulnerable. So what we are also doing, we are also trying to do the value addition. Okay, we are looking at now what we call the value chain development approach, where you develop the whole value chain from production. You see, we've been insisting so much on production, produce. But then we don't help them, you know, going upstream or downstream. I don't know what, those two confuse me. So we don't help them to go to the next level. So once you have produced this, and then can we help you to add value? Then once you have added value, can we also help you to get market access? So that's when the private sector becomes important, you know, because for them they are more interested in profit. So they will support the farmers so long as they see that, you know, they are getting something. They are getting something out of it. And then I think we've also got to begin thinking of moving away from smallholder farming to commercial farming, because our land holding is small, and sometimes it becomes the smallholder farmers. You know, we are talking about 2 acres and less. So you can imagine what can you do on that amount of land. So some people are even in a conversation that should we now begin, you know, looking at commercial farming as an alternative, because probably those farmers, the resources that we are giving the smallholder farmers, if we gave, instead of giving them to 10,000 smallholder farmers, if we gave them to 5,000 commercial farmers, would it make a different
Where does
impact?
that leave the smallholder farmer that we are speaking about when we're speaking about resilience?
Yeah, I think then it becomes a holistic approach where we are industrializing, because now when you industrialize your agriculture, all right, because it's about livelihoods. It's about where does this person get the livelihood. You know, they sell that small produce that they have, you know, in order to be able to take their children to school, in order to have medicine when they fall sick, in order to put up a small house, you know, where to live. And if you industrialize, then you create jobs for them, and probably then we get more resilient farming systems that will support us even as climate change begins to bite harder.
What is the Food and Agriculture Organization doing? What role does it play in the general area of climate change?
FAO?
Yes.
Well, we have what we call a farmer field schools approach, where we aggregate these farmers, the smallholder farmers, into about 20 to 30 households. And then that becomes our entry point. Now, through those farmer field schools, when I say school, it's like, we call it a school because that's where we do most of our training, okay? That's where we introduce new technologies. That is where we do the diversification in enterprises. That's where we do the value chain development. That is how we also, you know, encourage them to save. That is how they can access our water infrastructure, because we're also doing a lot in irrigation and provision of water in terms of valid tanks. We don't do dams, we do tanks, because dams are big and very expensive. So that's how we try to help the smallholder farmers. So that farmer field school approach has been quite successful, because at least when you go to the farmers who have joined the farmer field schools and those who have not, there's a difference, yes.
What would you like, from your experience in the agriculture sector, but also for all the adaptation work you've done, for all the work you've done in building curriculums around climate change and so on, what would you like to see happen at policy level that would support us better in withstanding the shocks of climate change?
I think we need to operationalize those policies, because the policy is a very generic document, okay? And climate change is contextual. It's different everywhere you go. The challenges in northern Uganda are not the same as Karamoja. They are not the same as in the Elgon area. They are not the same as, in the Kato corridor, in the Lake Victoria Basin. They are not the same. So we need to not stop at saying we have a policy and that's it. No, we should get now those instruments that operationalize. We need to get the strategies, we need to get the guidelines that will help operationalize this policy at the ground level, at the last mile. Then that is when we shall, and then also cost it. What does it take? Because you see, when you operationalize this policy, then it means you actually reach the level of the district development plan, because that is the one that determines what resources the district is going to have. And you've got to be so intentional on how much money are you putting there for climate change. You see?
Where are we failing?
Maybe sometimes prioritization, and sometimes doing things unconsciously. When you go down there, you'll find that people are actually adapting, but they are doing it unconsciously. Climate has been, this climate variability has been there all our lifetime, and people even who lived before us. So they have got different coping strategies. So what we've got to do is try and, be intentional and say, don't just do this as, something casually. Be intentional about it. If you are going to say water harvesting, then make it intentional and say your house will not be, given a certificate of occupation unless we see that you have a water harvesting system, unless we see that you've got solar panels, You see?
Yeah.
So when you are intentional like that, you are building a resilient community.
Anthony, I'm going to ask you a question, and it's going to sound silly, but why should I care about climate change? Because when I listen to a lot of conversations around it, it's all policy. It seems like a big picture. It seems like it's governments talking to governments. It seems like it's smallholder farmers who are way over there in rural communities. It seems that for me, who comes and sits in an office every day and I'm doing my paperwork, it just seems like a story I'm seeing on TV, and it's very far removed from me. Why should I care?
No, but it affects you, especially when you need to get to work and it has been raining the whole night, and then you come and you can't go through the Gogo.
That's a good example.
Yes. Then you begin to get concerned, and you won't build in a wetland. Because the wetlands ideally were there to absorb this water. and release it slowly. So when you build in the wetland, what you are actually doing, you are removing the sponge. You know, it's like when you get water here, you quickly bring a sponge, isn't it? And what will it do? It will suck up the water and you'll go and squeeze it in a sink. So ideally, that's what a wetland does. So if all this water comes, however heavy, however much it is absorbed. And then that wetland will release it slowly, clean it actually, and release it into the freshwater bodies, where you once again go and get your fish, where you go and you get your drinking water. But if this water, if you build the equivalent channels of this world, and then you are just pouring all this dirty water into the river, you are going to affect your fisheries resources, you are going to affect the quality of water you are drinking, and very soon they'll tell you can't drink water in Kampala, is not safe to drink from the tap. In other cities, you go, you drink tap water. Actually, you may think water is free, because they ask you, can we give you water? They just get it from the tap and give it to you, because water is so important. So those are some of the indirect effects that you'll have. You know, you'll have a higher incidence of disease. You know, COVID.
COVID is climate change?
Probably. Where did it come from? You see, there are new pests and diseases. There are new emerging diseases that were never there, and that's because of climate change. Yes.
You know, you've reminded me. I was at a meeting yesterday, and a lady asked me. She said, "Just when you work in climate." And I'm getting disgusted with all these conversations around climate change, because now it feels that for all of us in all of our work, we now must include an aspect of climate change so that donors can fund us. Because if we don't talk about climate justice, we are not attractive enough. And this is somebody who works in sexual reproductive health rights, and they couldn't make that correlation between the work they're doing and climate. How do we start to get people involved, you know, with them understanding that climate change is not just about agriculture, it's not tied to one sector?
I mean, you've got to look at the secondary effects, because if people are hungry, there's going to be gender-based violence. Okay? And that person is going to end up in the hospital. But this was the primary cause, was that the season was bad, food was not enough, the income at home went down, and this triggered
the tempers fled.
Yeah. And this triggered the gender violence. You see? And then, of course, so many other things will come up. You know, the sexual abuse and then maybe, you know, you have things like prostitution also going up and all that, because people are trying to look for alternative ways to survive. You know, so you can't say that what would you need to say? You need to look at what is happening. If people are not getting, and you know, agriculture provides, you know, livelihood for, I think, 60+%. I know that has gone down of the population. So if it's impacted by climate change, then definitely you're going to have almost all sectors, even health. I'm telling you that if you have the floods, you're going to have the diarrheal diseases. People are going to, their water is going to be contaminated, because you know that in our rural areas, you know, people have pit latrines and all that. So if this water comes and floods, then even all the water sources will be contaminated.
Cholera, dysentery, typhoid. So
yes, all that.
My final question, Anthony, you're a teacher, and when you speak climate change, you speak it in a way that allows us to maybe appreciate it even more than we normally do. What would be one thing you want people to understand about climate change?
I mean, we just have to know that, you know, we are living in one, it's like a global village, you know, and this is a problem that is affecting the whole globe. We don't need to blame one another, but we just need to reset. To reset in everything we are doing. Reset the economics, reset because there are opportunities. You know, we shouldn't look at it as, because it's not going away. So we shouldn't look at it like something we are going to solve. You know, if you have the engineering, you know, you will come up with an engineering solution. It's not going to change, but we just need to reset. We need to look at the opportunities. We need to be more careful with our natural resources, because actually the nature-based solutions are the only ones that are long-term, and they are the ones that may be the game changer in the end. So we need to rethink about our forests, our water bodies, our wetlands. Those are very, very important assets that we cannot afford to just degrade, and we don't think that we are going to have impacts.